when I got to college, and again, I wanted to be a priest. This was a minor seminary college, Loras College. At the time, it was a minor seminary. It isn't anymore. I had a priest in my theology class who had a doctorate in theology, and he was teaching a course in Christology. Because again, I was wanting to be a priest. And he took me aside, and he said, if you want to be a priest, in the Catholic Church, it's taught, sacerdotes est altus Christus, the priest is another Christ. So if you want to be like Christ, he says to me, do you want to be like Christ? And I says, well, of course. Doesn't every Christian want to be like Christ? He said, well, if you want to be like Christ, you need to do what Christ did. And again, that made sense. And again, nowadays we've kind of become suspicious about priests. But this was like 1968. And a priest was like God. I mean, whatever the priest said, that was it, And he said, well, if you want to be like Christ, then you do what he did. And he went to the East and studied with the gurus in India. He went and studied with the lamas in Tibet. He went to Egypt and studied with the magicians there. That's how he was able to raise the dead, to walk on water, to do all these miracles. So he says, what you need to do is you need to start studying the occult. And this is a priest telling me this. And so I thought, okay, now mind you, this is obviously decades before there was an internet. I mean, there was a little bookstore downtown. And I went there and I found a few scattering books on like the occult. And I found this book that was called Diary of a Witch by Sybil Leek. And she was one of the very first witches to, so to speak, come out of the broom closet. She was a British woman, and she was a medium. And anyhow, I read the book, and she was asserting in the book that witches were not evil, that this was an ancient pagan mystery religion. Among other things, she claimed that Jesus was a witch, and his 12 apostles were his coven, along with their wives, So I kind of bought into that. And I found out about this guy, Alex Sanders, who was the supposed king of the witches over in London. I sent him a letter. This is around 1968, 69. And his wife sent me back a thing. Okay, here's a coven in Rockford, Illinois, which is about 90 minutes from Dubuque. I went there and I got initiated as a witch. And then later on, I hooked up with an Alexandrian coven in Boston, and I was made a witch high priest. Started covens in, first of all, in Dubuque, where I was, and then moved to Milwaukee because there was a fellow there who had an occult bookstore. Because Milwaukee's a huge city. And he said, I've got all these people that want to become witches. Can you come and teach them?
When we're talking about like you being in a coven and you doing witchcraft, I just want to make sure that we don't skip over that part. Like, what kind of witchcraft are we talking about? Because there's a lot of.
It was okay. Witchcraft originally, the kind of publicly available witchcraft was originally started by Gerald Gardner, and he came out. And witchcraft became legal in England. It was a crime until 1951. It was made legal, and he claimed, and all of this is disputed, but he claimed that he came in contact with an ancient coven of witches in the New Forest region of England. They initiated him and then made him a high priest, and he went off and initiated other people. Then there's this other bunch, this Alex Sanders fellow. He also claims to have been initiated by an ancient line of witches by his grandmother. So those were the two main fountainheads of witchcraft in the 60s. Both were from England, but both had, spread to America. And it was white witchcraft. Both groups, their rituals were virtually identical. And but the Alexandrian group that I was in was more into ceremonial magic, which is like kind of, if in like Protestantism, they have the distinction between high church and low church. Well, Alexandrian is more high church witchcraft. But we didn't believe in the devil. We didn't think we were worshiping the devil. We thought we were worshiping a goddess. a moon goddess, and a
Another
horn god.
deity.
So it was like ditheism, if you will, two deities. And we didn't believe in demons. We just believed that it was all this nature, airy fairy, you know, gathering herbs in the forest and dancing in the nude. And, you know, it all sounds very innocent. Except there's, especially in the Alexandrian Rite, there's also some sex magic that's involved. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, thank you for clarifying. I just wanted to make sure that we got that covered. So actually, let's go back to the occult bookstore that you were talking about, and let's pick up the story from there.
Well, so anyway, I mean, so we hooked up with this fellow in the basement of the store. We would hold these classes. They were packed because there were all these people. And again, this was 1972.
Sammy Davis Jr. was part of that cult too, you know. Alistair the Crowley, y'all know him, right? We did a video on him. Check him out. The video is up.
And, you know, there was all these people kind of like quasi-hippies, and they wanted to get into the occult and magic and blah, blah, blah. The other thing that happened at the same time is that we encountered this fellow called Eli, who was a Grand Master Druid of North America. And Druids are a little bit different than witches. It's kind of like the difference between being a Baptist and being a Methodist, you know. And we were invited down to Arkansas, which is where this fellow lived. He had lived on top of a mountain. He had kind of a what do you call it, a organic farm there. And we went through the whole summer, got all this occult training. We were, you know, high priests in Druidism by the time we got done. At one point, I understand this fellow that owned the occult bookstore, he was kind of a manipulative guy who was very, you know, he was older than me, very cunning. He told me, he took me aside and he said, you know, if you really want to understand magic, you need to read this book. And he handed me the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. And I said, well, why would I want to read the Satanic Bible? Witches don't believe in Satan. And he said, well, just read the book. And his, LaVey's contention was that magic is really about Satan. But Satan is like an archetype, he said. There is no real Satan, but it's like an energy, egregore, an archetype that you can draw upon. And it kind of made sense to me. And again, pulling me in. Like the whole thing about the camel getting its nose into the tent before you know it, the camel's in there. So I wrote the Church of Satan, which at that time was in San Francisco. I became a member, a first-degree member. And then later on, I went through some exams and studies, and I became a warlock, which was a second-degree member of the Church of Satan. And at this also, I should say this, because this is critical. This Eli guy, the Grand Druid down in Arkansas, he gave us 2 words of advice. First of all, he said, if you really want to understand Luciferian energy, you need to join the Freemasonic Order. And he himself was a 33rd degree Mason. He showed me his little certificate.
We once did the research and we know about your boy right here, Albert Pike. Albert Pike admitted that Lucifer was God right here.
He also told me that if he ever felt like we were in deep spiritual trouble, that I should join the Mormon church, because it was a church that had been started by witches, for witches, that we could hang out in and pretend to be nice. The image of the Mormon church. They're straight, nice, wonderful, all-American people with happy families and white picket fences and, all of that. But secretly, they believe almost the same doctrines that witches believe. And we can get into that if you want. But anyhow, so he gave us that advice. Again, this was in the early 70s. So I joined the Masonic Lodge, became a Master Mason at the same time as I was a Satanist and a witch. And only our inner circle of the witches that by this time, we've initiated over 100 witches.
Satan and witch, that's two deities.
Only our inner circle knew that we were also Satanists. And we were continuing in this, and I finally figured out that there was a deeper level of Satanism, and I got in touch with some of them. And again, there was no internet. We had to do all this by mail and whatnot, and there was a group in Michigan.
And that's what I say about our ancestors and our elders. They didn't have the technology that we have today to do the research to find out what they was engaging into. Let's go.
Michigan called the Order of the Black Ram, which is like more hardcore satanic stuff. There was another group in Chicago called the Brotherhood, and I got involved with them because they were closer, because Milwaukee's just up the road about 90 miles from Chicago. And I got really, I sold my soul to the devil. That's how deep I got into this stuff.
Yeah. Before we actually get to that part, I want to make sure to take some time to talk about Freemasonry, because Freemasonry, it's very rare to actually talk about, to talk to former Masons, because it's something that you're not supposed to talk about. So it's kind of an opportunity while I have you here to kind of, for me personally, to learn, but also for the people to kind of have a knowledge about what Freemasonry is. You said that you became a Master Mason. Can you explain how the degrees and the lodges are set up in Freemasonry so people actually understand what we're talking about?
Well, the basic thing is what's called the Blue Lodge. And that consists of 3 degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. A lot of masons never go any further than that. I did, but basically it's like an initiatory process. The requirements are you have to, at that time, now mind you, this was, I think I joined in 75, you had to be a man, freeborn, of good report, and well recommended. So they asked you if you believe in God, and I said, yes, I did. And they didn't ask which God I believed in. They just, do you believe in God? And I said, yes. I didn't tell them that the God I believed in had horns. So anyhow, I went through there's this whole process. You do a lot of memory work, they call it. You memorize all of these ritual things. You have a mentor who's called your poster, who's an older Mason. And the guy that I had was a real, very kind guy, an executive in the power company. I can't remember the name of the company. And he helped me memorize all this stuff. And then you go to 2nd degree, and then you have a whole bunch of stuff to memorize. And just let me touch this briefly, because people ask me, well, at what point does Masonry start to look creepy? I mean, because there's tons of Christians that are Masons, literally thousands of them. And I just asked them, how can you do that? I mean, because when you start out as a Mason, they make you come to the lodge, they make you take off all your clothes except your undies. They put you in this, like, jammies. They're like, they're like pajamas. They're like, typically, the one knee is bare and one breast is bare. Your left breast, and I think your right knee. And you're blindfolded. You have a cable around your neck. It's like a belt. They call it a cable toe. It's your left breast, and I think your right knee. And you're blindfolded. You have a cable around your neck. It's like a belt. They call it a cable toe. It's like a velvet blue rope. And you're tied up. And you're led to the door of the lodge. And you've got a guy leading you, because, of course, you're blindfolded. He knocks on the door, and somebody on this is all ritualized. And the guy on the other side says, who comes here? And your guy who's guiding you, who's a lodge officer, he says, Mr. Bill Snevlin, who has been long in darkness, and now seeks to be brought to light, to receive the rights and benefits of the worshipful lodge, erected to God as all members have done before. And I asked Mr. Christian, Mr. Pastor, Mr. Elder, because there's, like it used to be, I don't know if it still is, it used to be 40% of the pastors in a Southern Baptist convention were Freemasons. And how can you say that you're in darkness when you have Jesus in your heart? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then, that's not it. You go into the lodge, you're led around, like they call it circumambulation. You walk around the lodge. They have these officers, the junior warden, the senior warden at the different, things of the compass. And in the east is the worshipful master, who's like the big cheese. Then you're made to kneel at this altar. Again, you're still blindfolded. And you're made to understand that you're putting your hands on this huge, it's like a pulpit Bible, big King James Bible. And this guy comes forward, this worshipful master, and he says, we're going to lead you through this oath. And I'm not going to go through the whole oath because it takes like 5 minutes, but it's this long, involved, and ultimately blood-curdling oath. At the end, you say, you swear, the essence of the oath is to keep the secrets of an entered apprentice Mason, which of course I'm violating right now. And then at the end, you swear that if I should ever reveal the secrets of an entered apprentice Mason, that I swear that I will have my throat cut across, my tongue torn out by the roots, and buried in the sands of the sea, where the tide ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours, should I ever knowingly violate this, my entered apprentice obligation. So help me God and keep me steadfast to the due performance of the same.
Spookism.
Now, if you were a Christian pastor or whatever, wouldn't that kind of raise the hair on the back of your neck?
Yeah, I think it was raised the head on the back of the necks of pretty much most people just to hear that.
Yeah. And then, at that point, the worshipful master says, my brother, in your current situation, what do you most desire? And then the guy that's with you, that he's a senior warden, says light, whispers it in your ear. And I say light. And then they remove the blindfold. And you see before you this big open Bible with a square and compass on it. And those represent the three great lights of Masonry. The Bible, the square, and the compass. And then they are revealed by the three lesser lights of Masonry, which are three burning tapers that are adjacent to the altar. Now that's the most mild initiation. From there on, they get more and more creepy. So I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but basically Masonry is an antichrist thing. It claims it's not religious, but it is. You know, they play around with it because they say, oh, well, we're just religious, but we're not a religion. Because if they were a religion, then if you were already a Christian, you shouldn't join another religion. Most Christians would say that. Like, if you're a Christian, you wouldn't become a Buddhist.
Right.
Well, Masonry is a religion. I mean, it has all the qualities. This is what I tell people. If you look at Webster's dictionary, there's three things that make something a religion, according to Webster. Number one, something has a belief in some sort of deity. Masonry has that. Number two, that belief is expressed in some sort of ritual. And Masonry is full of ritual. I mean, that's pretty much all it is. And then the third quality is it has a system of some sort of ethics or morality. And Masonry has that. So Masonry is a religion. And it's an antichrist religion. And the problem is that basically, if you drill down into this deep enough and read the books that are written by people like Albert Pike, like Albert Mackey, these are two, or Arthur Edward Waite. These are three prominent scholars of 19th century, early 20th century Masonry. And all of them were occultists. Arthur Edward Waite, he wrote a book on black magic and pacts, how to sell your soul to the devil. And in my book, shameless plug, this is an older edition. This is the first edition. It looks different now. But in my book, I document how almost every single leading occult person of the late 19th and early 20th century was a Freemason. They just go together like, love and marriage.
If people want to go look at these books, I just want you to kind of give them an idea, because if they want to confirm that for themselves, what books are you talking about? What people are you talking about?
Well, there's Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. He was like the greatest Masonic scholar in America of the 19th century. Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite, and he's buried in the Scottish Rite Temple, 13 blocks from the White House. So that's one. The other one is Albert Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. There's Arthur Edward Waite, who has a whole bunch of books on Masonry. And again, all of these are footnoted in my book. I mean, the last lots of pages of footnotes, because I'm not just making this stuff up. The other person who really you need to pay attention to in all of this, because he's more contemporary. Have you ever heard of Manly P. Hall?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was one of the most notable occultists in America in the 20th century. He passed away in 1994, I think. He was the head of the Philosophical Research Society. He was a very high-level ceremonial magician. And he was also a 33rd degree Mason. He was the head of the Philosophical Research Society. He was a very high-level ceremonial magician. And he was also a 33rd degree Mason. And he wrote this book, Lost Keys of Freemasonry. In that book, among many things, he says that when you become a master Mason, you are like a warrior on the block. And that's kind of a Masonic code. And the seething energies of Lucifer are yours to command.
So these are like the biggest Freemasonic figures that we know about today. And yet most Freemasons have no idea about this.
Yeah, because they don't read the books.
Right.
They join the lodge for whatever reason. It might be for business. Because, see, it used to be that up until, I think, the early 90s, lawyers and doctors were not allowed to advertise. They couldn't put, like, an ad in the telephone book. It was like an ethics thing. And so the only way that lawyers and doctors could kind of build up business was by Masonry. They joined the Masonic Lodge. They send referrals to one another, you know, a good old boys network. So that's why a lot of people join the lodge. Many people join it because they had an uncle or a father or a brother who was in it. And honestly, unless you really understand the occult, it's boring. I mean, imagine the most boring church service you've ever been in. And having spent 5 years in the Mormon church, I can relate to that. But it's just, you know, guys were sitting there snoring during the Masonic ritual when I was there. And, you know, because it's like watching paint dry. And they go every week. And when I was involved in this, I was like the youngest guy in the lodge by 20 years. All these guys were like 50, 60, 70 years old, you know, and basically they were there because they were buddies. And afterwards, they'd, you know, play poker and eat, you know, sandwiches or something.
Go along, get along.
But what none of these men understand, I don't think, is that deep down inside there's this very dark, evil energy, which is very sexualized. We document in the book how many men that have come to us over the years for deliverance they were in Masonry and they began to be drawn into wickedness, into perversion, and even into pedophilia. And it's
All
dark,
those
dangerous
popes.
stuff because it opens up unholy desires within the men. And then,
Remember all those priests that got locked up for messing with them kids? He's not lying.
because of the way the spiritual world works, that in turn percolates down into their family. And it affects the wife, who may or may not be involved, because there's a women's order of Masonry called the Order of the Eastern Star, whose symbol is a satanic pentagram, by the way. So anyway,
Like I said, y'all, a lot of our peoples ain't do no researching when they joined these organizations because we didn't have these tools as far as what we got with the internet to do some researching. You understand me? And like he said, a lot of preachers, and I said it, preachers, priests, the highest people in your church is tied into these organizations, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to say it again. This is why the African American community will never come together as one. There's too many organizations in them groups, man.
so many men that were Masons, at first it didn't appear a problem. But when their children started hitting puberty, they just started to go in various ways nuts because of this trickle-down influence of the Masonic Lodge.
Yeah, I actually interviewed a woman whose dad was a Freemason, and something very similar to that happened to her. So she was never involved in, the Eastern Stars, and as far as I understand, her mom wasn't involved either. But there was, an element of the children thing that you talked about with their family being abused, her siblings, sorry. And she also,
Incest.
around puberty, started developing, some weird things. So it does correlate with what you're talking about. But I want to make sure that people understand. I want to go back to the degrees of Freemasonry. You talked about the Blue Lodge. You also mentioned the Scottish Rite. There's the York Rite. Can you explain how that's set up so people actually understand what it means to be a 33rd degree Mason? Because I think there's a lot of confusion around it.
Well, it's a little complicated, but in America, English Masonry is different. But in America, after Blue Lodge, it forks off in two directions. You can either go to the Scottish Rite or the York Rite. The York Rite has 7 degrees. The Scottish Rite has 29 degrees. When I was made a Master Mason, I was told, because at that time, believe it or not, I was going to the seminary to become an old Catholic priest. And some of my brother Masons knew that. And they said, well, the York Rite is the Christian path, so to speak. So why don't you go up that thing first? So I did. And the top of the York Rite is what is called the Knights Templar degree. Right. You have these 29 degrees. Some of them are really creepy. I mean, seriously creepy. They have one, I think it's a 19th degree, where they actually try to call up the devil. And finally, at the top, the 32nd degree, which is the Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. And that's as high as most people go. If you're some really important person, either in industry or in politics or in entertainment, you might be offered to become a 33rd degree Mason, which is the highest degree in American Masonry. And many people, presidents, actors, people like, Roy Rogers, Harry Truman, all kinds of celebrities, Burl Ives, they're 33rd, or they're all deceased now, 33rd degree Masons, Gene Autry, many of these people. So that's the structure of it. And there's nuances in the York Rite that are very creepy, but the Scottish Rite is much more creepy.
Everyone understands, kind of what you already set up. I'll try to summarize it. So there's the Blue Lodge, which everyone has to go through, which is 3 degrees, and then you have 2 choices, either the York Rite, which is 7, or the Scottish Rite, which is 29. So 3 plus 29 equals 32. So 32 degrees, and honorary 33rd degree for people that are deemed to be important. So that's kind of how it works. Only on the Scottish Rite, that's where the 33rd degree happens. So
let me just correct something.
Yes, please.
If you're a 10th degree 9th Templar, you can become a 33rd degree Mason even if you never went through the Scottish Rite.
Okay.
Minor detail, but
okay. Thank you for clarifying. So, all right. Now we talked about the 33rd degree Mason. People usually are like, that's the highest level of Freemasonry that there is. There's also a bunch of people that talk about, there's secrets in Freemasonry that a lot of people don't know about, and you have to, be deemed worthy to be told these secrets. You became a 33rd degree Mason, and you eventually joined this secret group or secret order or whatever you want to call it. Can you explain what that is?
Okay. Well, beyond what we've just been talking about, over in Europe, there's what's called the Rite of Memphis Mithraeum, and that is 360 degrees beyond what's, I've already discussed. And most Masons don't even know about that. Now, I got up to the, if memory serves, 96th degree. And because how I did that is there was a group in Chicago where they were involved with that thing, because Chicago was, and probably still is, a major nexus of Satanism. Most people don't know that.
The Al
So this group
Sharptons, Barack Obama,
brought me into
Jesse
Memphis Mithraeum, and
Jacksons, all
ultimately
them niggas.
there was a fellow that flew over all the way from Paris, who was the son of Pappas. Now, you probably don't know that name, but Pappas was a very prominent 19th century high-level occultist and ceremonial magician, and he wrote a book called The Tarot of the Bohemians, or about tarot cards, And he came over and he brought me into the 97th degree. And this is where you get into the really deep stuff, the ideas behind sexual alchemy, how to supposedly live forever, all this creepy stuff. Anyway, I would go up to these guys that had been in the Scottish Rite forever, older men that were in their 60s, and I'd say, okay, I'm now a sublime prince of the royal secret. Wang, they did this initiation, and I was a sublime prince of the royal secret. I said, so what's the royal secret? And they go, I don't know. Now, whether they were just feigning ignorance, because at this time I was like in my late 20s, or what, I don't know. But I learned eventually, after getting into the Rite of Memphis Mithraeum, and again, this is something that probably only 1 in 1,000 Masons in America understands, is that the royal secret is that you can live forever by sexually vampirizing children. Literally. And that's what these people believe.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
And that's what these people believe. Now, again, the vast majority of Masons have no understanding of any of this. They just think it's this good old boys club that teaches, morality And this is the way with almost all of these groups, whether it's the Mormons or the Masons or the witches or the Vatican. They all had this vast number of reasonably good people, in some cases very good people,
Right.
under them that are sort of feeding them all of this energy. Because let me back up. When I was into Satanism, we understood and were taught that Satan draws energy from being worshipped. And when these guys, they don't even if they don't understand it, every time a Mason kneels at the altar and swears an oath, the devil gets energy from that. And again, most Masons, if they heard this, they would be scandalized. They'd say, this guy's a nut. But the funny thing is, and like you say, you've talked with people who, to a greater degree or a lesser degree, and believe me, we've talked to dozens of people over the years in ministry who came to us, who were, like sodomized as children, who were literally taken to the Masonic Lodge after hours, laid on that very same altar that the Holy King James Bible laid on, and they were ganged by a bunch of old men that were all high-level Masons until they were practically dead.
Yeah, that's pretty much the story that I heard, without details, because it was an eyewitness account. It was a secondhand witness, but it's similar to what I heard before. So okay, a lot is said about Freemasonry, and you kind of said how Freemasonry is worshiping Lucifer, and I think that's made very clear in the books that you talked about. If people want to check the references, they can check your book, or they can go directly to the references if they doubt anything, because it's in there. I want to go back to something that you said earlier, because we kind of did a tangent on Freemasonry, because I thought it was very important. But you talked about selling your soul. Let's get back to that, because I definitely don't want to ignore that. Can you explain the circumstances around it?
Well, again, there was this group in Chicago, and they were entwined with this Memphis Mitzrayim rite, and they were also with this. It was like two things together: the Brotherhood, which I mentioned earlier, and then this Memphis Mitzrayim thing. And I interacted with these people, and at a certain point, they said, well, if you want to go any further and become a satanic priest, you need to, sell your soul to the devil. And so they took me to this park in Glen Ellen, Illinois, which is like a suburb of Chicago. I don't know if it's still there or not, but it was a very weird park. It was broad daylight. And they said, don't worry about it. The cops are all devil worshippers. and in the center of the park, there was this area where they had these weird Egyptian statues. There literally was an altar with horns, kind of like the pictures you see of the altar in the Temple of Solomon, that kind of thing. And they brought out this black book, and there were all these names in it, and this one supposed high-level Satanist kind of officiated, and I swore an oath to Satan, my allegiance to him, that I would serve him for 7 years, and he would give me everything I wanted, wine, women, song, power, occult power, whatever. And at the end of those 7 years, he could kill me and take me to hell. By that time, I had been told that the Satanists believe that hell is like one long orgy of drugs, sex, and rock and roll, so to speak, So I didn't think going to hell was a bad thing at that time. So I had to sign my name in blood in this black book. And supposedly, this sounds funny, but I was supposed to go out and find 7 people to sell their souls to the devil under me, so to speak, sort of like multi-level marketing, but for the devil. And I did. I got 7, and I feel so bad about this. I've contacted as many of these people as I can find to try and talk them out of it and, repent and all that. But, and still, I didn't have the things I needed. I had my life was not good. Even though I was supposedly this high-level warlock, satanic priest, blah, blah, blah. I was working at a nothing job. I was a security guard in a warehouse, barely getting by. And then what happened is I'd written a check. Every year I wrote a check to the Church of Satan. I think it was for $10 to renew my subscription. They had a newsletter, probably still do, called The Cloven Hoof. And when I got the check back from the bank, because they used to do that, someone had written on the check, some lady by the handwriting, "I'll be praying for you in Jesus' name." And I just scoffed. And the funny thing is, let me just say, I had not had any contact with Christians. Nobody ever tried to witness to me. Nobody, had ever come to our door and try to, give us tracts or talk about Jesus. Even the Jehovah's Witnesses never came to our door because they were scared of us. Because people understood. They'd see us out in the backyard in the moonlight in black robes dancing around. So anyway, I got this check and I just scoffed at it. And literally, within 24 hours, it was like I was hit with a freight train. I lost all my occult power, and believe the magical power is real. I lost my job. I got as sick as a dog. And I thought, what the heck, So we had an altar up in the attic. The whole attic, we painted it black. We had a magic circle on the floor. I had a big statue of Pan, the horn god, all kinds of creepy stuff. And I went up there and I knelt and I prayed to Lucifer. And I said, "What's going on? I've done everything you've told me, and my life is just increasingly gone to hell, literally." And the funny thing is, even though I was praying to Lucifer, Jesus answered my prayer. Because the next day, we got a call from these two teenage Satanist girls from Chicago. They wanted to come up and meet me because they heard about I was this great satanic priest. And so they came up on the train. They said, "We had a gift for you." And I thought, well, I could use a gift right now because I just lost my job. I don't have hardly any money, And they show up at the door and they sit adoringly at my feet. And they give me these two comic books from Chick Publication. I assume you're familiar with Chick Publications.
I'm not. I think I'm too young for that.
It's a Christian publishing house. And he made these, I don't know how many there are now, but at the time there were like 15 or so full-color comic books. But they were about Christian themes. And they were intended to be soul-winning tools. And in the back of them, there was, a thing about, okay, how to get born again. And the two that these kids gave me, I say kids because they were probably in their late teens, one was called Spellbound, and one was called Angel of Light. And you can look these up. They're probably available online. And they are about the dangers of the occult and about how Lucifer is really the god behind all false religions. And I just looked at them and, whatever, and threw them in the door in the closet and forgot about them. Well, anyway, the next day, there's a knock on the door, and we open it up, and it's Mormon missionaries. Never had one come before. And they always are, two of them. Two young men. And I remembered what this guy said, this Grandmaster Druid, back in, 1973. We're now in 1980. And we joined the Mormon Church because we thought that was where we were supposed to be. This was a sign from Lucifer. So I joined the Mormon Church. I tried to be a good Mormon. I stopped doing dope. I stopped having orgies. I was just monogamous. Because we had been led to believe by this Druid guy that the Mormons were white witches. And so we still did white witchcraft, but we didn't do Satanism anymore. We got all of that out of our lives. went to the temple in the Mormon church, did all their secret rituals, which are very Masonic.
Well, let's actually stop there because this is actually important. What kind of role did you have in the Mormon church? Because we just talked about missionaries coming to your house and you said you joined. Can you explain a little bit, the progression and what kind of role you eventually got there?
Yeah, well, okay, you get baptized, and then after a year, if you, mind your P's and Q's and pay your tithing and all of that, you're made an elder. And that's what I was. I was an elder. And then later, I was made an elders quorum president. So that's like an administrative role right under the bishop. Now understand, in a Mormon church, I don't know if it's still this way, but back then, this is in the 80s, a bishop, like most people think of a bishop as some really high-level guy, In the Mormon church, the bishop is the head of a local congregation. They call it a ward, W-A-R-D. And an elders quorum president is kind of like right under the bishop and takes care of administrative stuff. And I had some time on my hands, and I was trying to find work, and I was plugged into the local Mormon church in Dubuque, the ward there. But of course, I was no longer an elders quorum president. And I saw this thing in the local penny advertiser, that said, there's going to be a prophecy seminar at this park. Well, that's good. I thought I can go to this prophecy seminar, because it didn't say what church it was, and I can steal some sheep, because I belong to a church that's being run by a true prophet. Whoop-de-doo. And so I went to this thing, and I had never been to a Protestant service. And there was this evangelist up there, and they were talking about the book of Revelation. And this guy was presenting the gospel in the context of explaining their version of what the book of Revelation means. So anyway, he was talking about how you're saved by grace through faith, the basic Christian gospel. And I kind of raised my hand, being, this wiseacre, because they didn't know I was a Mormon. And you see, Mormons teach that basically there's only two choices for the true church. Either the Catholics, who claim, to have this apostolic succession all the way back to Peter up to the present day, or else Joseph Smith, who was supposedly given this mandate in the year 1830 by the angel Moroni and by John the Baptist and whatever. And because they said that all the Protestant churches were split off of the Catholic Church, and so therefore they had no authority. And so either you got to be a Catholic or you got to be a Mormon. And so I raised this point with this guy, and he says to me, well, where do you get the idea that you need to be baptized in order to be saved? It says in Acts 16:31, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved, and thy house. And that was the Bible verse that hit me. Because I'd already read the whole King James Bible, because the Mormons use the King James Bible. I'd read the Bible through 5 times as a Mormon. But I'd never seen that verse, like, how Bible verses leap out at me. And this verse went through my magic Mormon underwear like a bullet through a sheet of wet tissue paper. And I went home, and I was trembling, and I prayed, and I fasted. Because that's what Mormons are supposed to do. If you run into a spiritual dilemma, it says right in Doctrine and Covenants, which is one of the Mormon scriptures. Of the 4, they have 4 scriptures. They have the Bible, the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. And I prayed and I fasted, and supposedly, if you do that, if what you're thinking of is true, you get a burning in your bosom. And if it's not true, the Holy Spirit will send you a stupor of mind, and you will forget what you're even talking about. So I didn't get either one. And so I did bring to mind the comic books that I had gotten 5 years earlier or more by this time. And I went and dug him out because I remember in the back it was How to Be a Christian. And so I got down at the foot of my bed, I knelt, I took off my magic Mormon underwear because I didn't want any static on the line when I talked to God. And I prayed the prayers in the back of that comic book, and I got born again. And that was the beginning of my journey as a true Christian.